and welcome to this week's Birkbeck Connections video. Birkbeck Connections in Organisational Psychology is a network that aims to bring our professional community together. We want to share the latest evidence, trends in practice, and learn from each other. So it's open to academics and alumni and staff and students and anyone with an interest in organisational psychology. When possible, we're going to be hosting face-to-face quarterly networking meetings, but at the moment, what we thought we'd do is curate a short video interview series, sharing some really relevant and particularly pertinent experience and evidence from the according to the current situation, from members of the Department of Organisational Psychology here at Birkbeck. Today, I'm thrilled that we're joined by Dr. Joanna Yarka. As some of you might know, Jo and I have dual academic and practitioner careers. We joined the Department of Organisational Psychology here at Birkbeck last year to set up the professional doctorate in organisational psychology. Jo and I share our role at Birkbeck, and we also share our role outside of Birkbeck as well, in our consultancy Affinity Health at Work. Our work in both research and practice is focused on improving health and well-being at work. And the key driver in everything we do, including our professional doctorates, is to look at need-led research and to turn research and translate research into practical resources and interventions and promote evidence-based practice. Jo has got her expertise in return to work, and in the last 5 years, she's conducted research and developed a whole suite of guidance materials for organisations and managers and employees to support the return to work process across a whole range of psychological and physical health conditions. We're now at this extraordinary time where the majority of us are going to be having a transition back to the workplace. So, in this interview, Jo's going to share with us some of her wisdom and experience about how best to do this. So, Jo, you've been working in this field for a long time now. Tell us a bit more about your research and why some of the themes are so important now.
Thank you. I think it's such a fascinating time in terms of the work that we've done over the last 15, 20 years. We've been really privileged to have insight into different experiences, people going through different challenges. So whether it's people managing chronic illness and managing a fluctuating condition, so they've been in and out of work in a frequent way, or whether it is people who've been going through cancer treatment and cancer survivors looking to come back into the workplace after a period of maybe 3 months, 6 months, maybe a year. And I think one of the things that has been really interesting to see as we bring themes together is that regardless of illness, regardless of treatment that an individual goes through, actually there are so many psychological factors that play out to determine how we find that return to work experience. And I think those really come into their own in helping us understand what we do during this really difficult time. We can see that over the last few years, we've developed and tested different types of interventions that are to do with self-management, to do with supporting line managers so that they can have better conversations to support that return to work. And now we're all in that position of the absent employee. We're all in the position of uncertainty. We're not quite sure what we're going back to, or if we have already gone back, it's quite a markedly different environment. We're also in this place of deep challenge, really. There's some people that have had time to rest and recuperate, but actually many of us, and the recent survey that came out just yesterday, actually, which won't be yesterday when this airs, but from Mind, that looks at the percentage of people that say that their mental health has suffered during the pandemic is, I think, 70-80%. So in terms of where we're going back into work and the workplace in a position where we're really mentally depleted and we're exhausted. We've been through great challenge, some of us experiencing grief, some of us experiencing isolation and the impact that comes from that, some people being very bored and thinking about what that has done in terms of the weight on cognitive processes, but also the juggle of care that individuals have had. And so typically when people return into work, and when we have been supporting people back into work, what we've seen is you have one individual going back into a team or a workplace that has been otherwise normally functioning. And now we're in a position where we have millions of people globally going back into this situation, which is incredibly different. And everybody, including those people that are leading us, are themselves depleted in many ways. So I think it's just a fascinating and challenging time, but one which we can really draw from what we know in relation to return to work to make it a little bit easier and smoother as we go forward.
When you put it like that, it sounds like such an enormous challenge, doesn't it? That suddenly we've got people returning to work in such different scenarios, with bringing such different conditions and experiences. Is there anything from your research you can say that, from an overall point, that would be useful for all to ensure that people return back safely and smoothly?
Absolutely. I think that there are two parts, aren't there? There's the safety, and with that, it's the physical safety, but also the psychological safety. And I think what we can see through, not only in the UK, but globally, there has been this real impetus to think about the physical safety. So how do we keep our workforce safe? How do we stop the spread of disease? And so what we can see is that organizations are putting in different safety measures depending on their context. So whether that's hand sanitizers stations, whether it's plastic coverings and partitions, whether it's additional cleaning, and alongside that, to protect the physical safety, we also have a huge workforce effort in terms of logistics of rotational patterns and thinking about that. And so it's been fantastic to see health and safety and occupational health and HR professionals coming together to think, how do we really put all of those things in place on a large scale? But what I suppose I'm a little concerned about for many people is that in those great efforts, what we sometimes forget are the basic principles of a good return to work, which really help us protect our psychological well-being. And so what we know from the research is how we felt about work beforehand and how we've been treated during our absence is absolutely crucial to understanding how we feel on our return. And so what we need to make sure we're doing is, at this point, as we're approaching return for many people, is to make sure that we're talking and connecting with our team, with our line manager, with the wider organization. And so if you have a good relationship, if you have maintained communication so that there are clear channels of understanding throughout absence, it's much more likely that the absence process and the return process goes smoothly. So we need to make sure that we're putting extra effort in now, so that people, when they do return, they feel that they were valued during this difficult time that they've been out of the workplace. The other thing that we can really do, and I think people don't often take time to do this, is to plan and prepare ourselves, really, and also think about what that means for our team. So often when people go back to work, what we see is there will be very little there'll be lots of worry about what's going to happen when I get there, but people are not necessarily feeling that they're able to take ownership of that and prepare in the way that they would like to. There's not many frameworks to allow us to do that. And so it can be really useful to think about how our job is structured, what our job looks like, maybe using something like the HSE management standards for work stress, thinking about, how do I have control over my work? What are my work demands? How do I work with relationships? So that we can think about, what does my job involve? What can I do now? How's that going to change? And what am I concerned about, so that I can start to take specific action and talk specifically about those things that I'm concerned about. And then that leads us to a good return to work conversation. So helping us have a conversation with our manager as a team about what's going to happen on our return. So rather than it being something unknown, we're very, very clear about what is going to happen. And then taking one step at a time, what we see with those people that return to work is it's very much generally seen as an event that is going to happen and then everything's going to be fine. And increasingly what we see is this recognition that it's a journey, and our careers ebb and flow, our workability ebbs and flows depending on work events, depending on illness and health. And so if we take one step at a time, we can make decisions that will help us in the short term, but those decisions will help us in the long term. And that acceptance that things will need to change. And also we might try things that don't work, and that's absolutely fine. And we can revisit it. So we need to continually monitor and review so that we're making those steps towards a good work environment for everybody.
It's really interesting when we talk about that conversation and that importance of the being able to have the conversation. I'm conscious that when we talk about psychological health and our own psychological health, there's still quite a lot of stigma and difficulty in having those. Have you found that there's any models, or have you developed any models or frameworks that can help organisations and employees have that conversation, help with this process?
I think it's a really important point to bring up stigma, and certainly with mental health now being much more front and centre of an organisational agenda, and anywhere we look in the papers, online, we can see that the discussion around mental health is really coming to the fore. But there is that stigma, and I think one of the things that we've really found that is helpful is to think about the specific implications for work. So rather than necessarily saying, this is how I feel, it is, I am concerned about this specific aspect of my work, and this is why, or this is the potential solution that could help me manage it. And taking that very specific element can really help us manage what we want to disclose, but also give us more confidence in discussing the impact on our mental health. So within that, one of the things that we have been doing has been working with Karina Nielsen from Sheffield, and also colleagues in Loughborough, so Femme de Menir, and elsewhere, to think about what is it that we can do as individuals, as groups, as leaders, as organisations to support that return to work. And the Igloo framework that we have conceptualised and then more recently tested and explored with some ESRC funding has been really helpful in identifying those absolutely crucial specific factors at each of those levels, at the individual, the group, the leader, and the organisation. And so in terms of individuals, making sure that we have key principles of self-care in place. If we're not looking after ourselves, we can't function. And so what is it that we need to do for ourselves, whether that is exercise, whether it is taking notice and going for walks and looking at our environment, whether it is supporting others and keeping those social connections. There's lots of things that we can do to look after ourselves, and along with that, keeping those boundaries so that we are being very clear that this is when we're working and this is when we're having leisure time. And particularly those people who return to work following mental ill health, it is those people who are very, very strict on their boundaries and prioritise their self-care that find that return process easier and also more sustainable. And it takes effort to do those sorts of things, doesn't it? Nobody really wants to go for a run in the morning or to go to Pilates at the end of a long working day. But it's really important that we make sure we give time to those things and give time to the things that we have enjoyed really as we've been off work as well. And the other side there is thinking about confidence. So do we need to build any skills? Do we need to develop any understanding or knowledge to help us manage ourselves in this new context? The second side is thinking about what we can do as a group. So those people that are returning to work have often reported that having or knowing that there is support on difficult tasks is really important. So if there are things that you find difficult, it's quite helpful to make that known within your team so that then you can invite support for them. Having that check-in, having the social support and the informal conversations is really important to help you feel valued. Then from a leader level, line managers that take accountability, they don't necessarily need to have all the answers. They don't necessarily need to step in and take action. But what they do need to do is be accountable and make sure something happens to support that individual with their concern, whether that is directing them to the right information, whether it is taking ownership of their concern to make sure that they're put in touch with the right person that is then going to have the ability to support them. But when people are going through struggle, what we find is a good line manager is one that really helps break down the barriers to support, rather than just say that they care and signpost them to important information. The other thing there is thinking about some of the key behavioural competencies. So we did some work with BORF a long while ago, looking at the line manager competencies that are important for return to work, regardless of condition. And there, being open, being available, taking responsibility, dealing with conflict within the team, all of those things are absolutely vital. And there's quite a useful checklist that as managers are returning their teams to think about, am I modelling these behaviours? Am I showing those to my team? Because if I do, they're much more likely to find the return easy and smooth. And then as an organisation, we can learn much from what we've been doing before in terms of embedding flexible work patterns. But I think what's come to the fore now is, number one, we really need to look at our absence management policies and make sure that we are implementing them in a compassionate way. So often what we see is when people return, it's a challenge to fit the different treatment regimes, the different needs, the fluctuating condition with an absent management policy that is very rigid and leads to a disciplinary after a certain number of days absence. But actually, in this context where we're moving forward, if you're returning having had COVID, we know that symptoms fluctuate for many months. We know that many people are returning to work but have significant childcare or care challenges. And I think we need to think really creatively about how we manage our absence management policies in a compassionate way because of that. And then finally there, thinking about how we support our line managers. So those people that return effectively have a good, reliable, trusting line manager to support them through that journey. And there's lots going on for line managers at the moment. So we need to make sure that they are aware, that they are equipped and have the skills, but also that they have the confidence to manage these difficult things that are ahead. So I think organisations could certainly do well by equipping their line managers and supporting them to support the rest of the organisation.
So many useful resources there and ideas, and I know we're going to include some of those resources at the end of this video, aren't we? Mm-hmm. Last question I wanted to, again, reflecting on the knowledge that although organisations have generally got really good at being able to manage psychological health within organisations, and perhaps still at the start of the journey, many in terms of the return to work process. Do you think, given that we're going to have so many people go through this return to work process now, do you think that things will change in terms of the way we manage return to work following the pandemic?
I really hope so. I think what has been, if there is a positive outcome out of all of this, I think one of the things is that mental health is now front and centre of people's minds. We've all been feeling compromised in some way along this journey, and we're all going back to work in a different way. And so even if we don't have first-hand experience of returning to the workplace or returning to work, we certainly have secondhand, third-hand experience from stories that we're hearing. And I think that really helps us to be better as peoples to manage other, or at least be aware that it's not an easy process. And therefore, when somebody is returning, following an illness, following a break because of maternity or paternity leave, that actually we can put ourselves in those shoes and remember, gosh, that is a tough time, because there's a lot swirling around in our minds, a lot of uncertainty, and we can help manage that and help support them through that. I think the other thing that's really great is it sparked a multidisciplinary discussion. So any of the conversations that I have been in and advisory groups that I've been involved in have been brilliantly multidisciplinary, and you learn so much from seeing different perspectives. And so I think one thing that will happen is we will no longer take a siloed approach. So it's impossible to have a good return to work without bringing occupational health and health and safety and vocational rehabilitation and psychology and HR together. So we really need to make sure that we foster that and take it forward. And then I think the other thing that I think will change as we go through is recognizing actually that we don't have, I was listening earlier about the role of science in the pandemic. And I think what we're not always very good at as scientists is saying we just don't know, and we don't know the answers, and there is no right or wrong yet, and there's no one truth. But certainly within the area of mental health and return to work, what we see is there is so much we don't know, and that's a shocking shame, really, because we can't then make good decisions based on evidence. And so we need much more evidence around what work adjustments work for people returning, what the role of disclosure plays in that access and maintenance of work adjustments, but also the psychological experience. And also then what is it that helps people sustain in the long term their workability. So we all need to work longer and later in life. And it's unreasonable to suggest that we're going to be in one job and at work all that time. So we need to make sure that we better understand how people can transition in and out of work in a safe and secure way, but also then sustain their workability and be able to work at a pace and a level and a level of cognitive demands that is suitable for their current needs. And that needs the individual themselves and also the organisation to develop more knowledge and better ways of having those conversations. So in doing that, I think what we really need is better tracking and monitoring of that return to work experience and build our evidence base. And then from a practical point of view, equipping our workers, whether they're the employees and the colleagues or the line managers, to really understand what's going on and what they can be doing to anticipate and better manage some of those uncertainties ahead, so that we can have open conversations, so that we can make better decisions, and we can sit with that need for change as well.
Thank you, Jo. It's lovely to see some hope there. It'll be fascinating to revisit this in a year, won't it, and see what's changed and what's happened, and whether that evidence base, because of the volume, has been created as well. Really, really lovely. Watch this space to end on. So thank you. Next week, everyone do join us. The next video we'll be with Professor Alex Beauregard, and we're talking about COVID-19 and what it means for gender equality. So not one to miss. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Jo, and bye-bye.